Welcome to Friday night's video in our second master series. I do believe this is the 54th video in our second master series and the third video on basic processors and the second video on equalizing. So I hope you enjoyed the last video and you got your starting to look at getting out your normal parametric EQ and your dynamic EQ and understanding, and those are the ones I'm going to be focusing on, the ones that are going to be of most importance to you. The next thing that we want to talk about before we even get into the equalizer itself is two different topics. The first topic is the equal loudness contour. This is a huge topic. If you look at my first master series on equalization, it's very prominent in that workflow. And also, I do believe there's some videos on my channel about the equal loudness contour that you should familiarize yourself with, but we're going to go through it again because we're directly relating or directly looking at the equalizer itself, and it is very fundamental in your using the equalizer well. The next thing we're going to talk about is where you should equalize and where you shouldn't equalize. This is a huge problem. Now, that concept, we'll get into the equal loudness contour in a minute, but the concept of where you should and where you should not equalize is problematic. There's a couple of different problems to it. The first problem is it's an opinion. Now, your opinion of whether if I go into something and I'm going to boost up here, or that is my opinion of whether or not that sounds good or not. And my opinion may be valid in my opinion in certain situations, where in certain situations it's not. It's like I've got an oboe, and it by itself, if I boost up here by itself, it sounds horrible. But in the mix, I might boost it up here, and by itself, it might not sound as good, but in the mix now it sounds great and has preserved its identity to sound really good. So that concept is huge for you to get in your head. So once you understand that, the next problem with where I should and where I shouldn't equalize is vocals. Depending on how good of a microphone you're using, how good of outboard your gear you have, and things like that, how good your environment is, can have an impact on how much equalization you do. Sometimes you don't want to fuss it too much if you've got great equalization or great equipment and great environment to begin with. So you want to really take that into consideration. And remember that with all the basic processors if I don't mention it again. So that's something to take into consideration. The next thing is there are different categories. The first category is a dry vocalist. The dry vocalist, more than likely, I'm going to do equalization on it. I just am. I've got a dry vocalist with a microphone, possibly with impact from the environment that has a frequency response that's affecting the sound, plus the frequency response of the microphone is also affecting the equalization of that ultimate capture. So I'm more than likely, I've got a lot of play that I can work with a vocalist. A vocalist is a dry type of equalization situation more times than not, because you only have those two things that are most of the time affecting what's happening other than some outboard gear. So you have a lot of play to work with that type of capture. So the second type of thing is, now that can be instruments also. So like a dry violin or a dry oboe or something like that, or a really clean guitar that, is an acoustic guitar or something like that, can be a real natural sound that has a dry ultimate capture that you're working with, depending on how much, your equipment and your environment is affecting that. The second thing we run into is things that are affected by effects or amplification, saying like guitars. Say a really good example of that next category is guitars. You have a guitar that has not only he's running through certain effects, but he's also equalized it in his own way to have his own sound, and he's running it through his own amplifier. that is affecting the equalization and the frequency response that is eventually being captured by your microphone, that also is getting affected by the room if you wanted it to impact it, and the microphone, the frequency impact it has on, and any outboard gear that goes through, is all in line, one line at a time through the signal flow chain, affecting the ultimate sound that you have captured. How much you can fuss with that is debatable without ruining the sound. Just because you might think it sounds good, that's debatable. They might not like that. You might want to bring them in on it before you start fussing with it too much, because it's not as a dry, natural sound that you can affect that much. Plus, you have characteristics of the amplifier itself, the effects pedal, and the cabinet that is inherently affecting his sound that he may want to, that you might be detrimentally affecting it. And if you aren't really familiar of what characteristics each one of those things in the signal flow chain are affecting it, so that you can affect it in enhancement characteristics, that you may come to problems working with them. So that is a study into itself that I put on your shoulders to start investigating into, because that is the next level of things you got to be careful about, because you can make a mess out of something that didn't sound too bad, and you start trying to enhance it, and all of a sudden you've made a complete mess out of this poor guy's sound. That he's got a certain type of guitar, he's used a certain pickup, he's run the da 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 through a certain amplifier, through a certain cabinet, and plus your room and your microphone, everything in the signal flow chain has affected it, and you end up with a mess. You start perching one note around on your parametric EQ, and you've caused a mess, and you don't even not sure what you did or what aspect of the signal chain of the sound or whatever it is that you've affected, because you're not real familiar with everything that's happened to that sound throughout the signal flow chain, or what he was trying to accomplish, or what you might have even been accomplished if you were doing it yourself. So it's a study unto itself for you to take that into consideration, understand that, and then start taking appropriate actions and studies of studying those things that are what's happening, so that you can better understand where you can affect equalization to enhance the sound, rather than cause yourself a mess to where you're just like, I don't know how to equalize that, because you didn't study what was happening in through the signal flow chain. So that's a huge thing, and it's a huge topic that I can make a whole nother series on, which I'm not going to, because just you understanding that is going to help take you to that next level as a master audio engineer, because you're going to be very careful as a master audio engineer with your equalizer before you start fussing with those stuff, and you're going to start really fine targeting when you do anything in that type of situation, so that you don't cause yourself a mess, so that you really take into consideration what you're doing, and you're doing things purposefully with a knowledgeable understanding of what has happened to that sound before you start fussing with it. So that's a huge topic, and I don't leave you hanging there, but I kind of have to, because that has to sink in, and you have to start really studying that and thinking about that as you understand equalization better and what we're doing throughout this segment on equalization. It will become more apparent where you need to focus on, where you need to investigate, and then when you start trying to do enhancements, how you should approach that delicately. Okay, so the next thing that we come to, the next sound that we come to that is problematic, is a couple different ones. The first one we'll talk about samples. Samples are another problem that you don't know what they did to the sample. So it's very experimental and very delicate whenever you're dealing with samples. Samples from synth patches, or samples that you have audio samples or anything like that, that you're very careful of that and approach it in a way that it's just like that guitarist that you had, and we talked about in the second situation, that it's a situation that you aren't even privy to the knowledge of what all it went through and what all they did to it, so that you can take appropriate knowledgeable actions of counteracting things that are a problem, or enhancing things in a way in an environment that you are very well and knowledgeable understanding of what it's gone through to become the sound that it is. So that's even a more delicate situation that you need to take that into consideration and think about that. Just thinking about these things makes you that next level master audio engineer. And to get even farther is you need to delve into it and study about that, really think about it and think about that's impact on what you're working on. So again, a mouthful. The next thing we want to talk about is synth patches. Synth patches are very difficult because not only when you have a complicated synth patch, you can get, there's a whole series on my channel about synthesizers. There's all kinds of different synthesizers that can do all kinds of different things. A seriously involved synth patch that involves all kinds of different synthesis, you want to be very, very, very careful with, because anything you do might be affecting some application in the synthesis process that accomplished a certain type of sound, which not only takes things from the natural arena we talked about in the first situation, but also takes aspects of the second situation, like the guitarist running through the amplifier, effects boards, and da-da-da-da-da. And it also takes applications of the next area of you have unknown things happening in the synthesizer thing that from table synthesis, sample synthesis, all kinds of different aspects of synthesis and how well it does it, that all are going to affect, and things that may have been done during things that you're using with a synthesis that you don't have privy to have knowledge of to be able to make a knowledgeable decision of how to fix that or enhance that. So again, that makes it very difficult. So you understand when I talk about equalization being one of your most important tools and having the biggest impact on your production. One of the biggest impacts is because these characteristics in these different situations you're going to run into during a production, and you need to approach them delicately and as knowledgeable as possible and understanding these things are happening so that you take your time, do a good job, take that into consideration, and be very careful about any work that you do when you're trying to affect any piece of audio with equalization. And hopefully by me stating this, helps you to understand the situation you are in as a quote-unquote next-level master audio engineer, and that you really need to take that into consideration. And when you're dealing with things like synthesizer patches and things like that, that anytime you try to affect those type of things with equalization, you are changing more things than you may initially think you're changing by changing the equalization, because not only does it just change the static EQ of what you think is a sound, but it's also, there are multiple different aspects of that sound that it's like you trying to equalize each one of those different aspects separately, but together, and it's going to affect each one of those separate aspects a little bit differently, but it's affecting them as a whole, which is going to have a totally different aspect than you go and trying to equalize each one of those different aspects separately before you mix them together at one stage at a time to come out with either this cool synthesized track that you've equalized every separate part of it, or this, like the second scenario we talked about with the guitar, that you've equalized every separate part of the signal flow before, as you mix them together, that it's taken into consideration, so that as this next level master audio engineer, that now you understand that a little bit better, and you can sit back and think about that and understand it is an issue, and why most people that I've seen in audio engineering trying to become that next level master audio engineer fumble around with their equalizer, because they don't take that into consideration, and so they really have problems with doing a really good job in equalizing, because they're not thinking about that and understanding that that is, you know, what they're dealing with, and to take their time and to take into consideration for them to do a good job with their equalization. So I know that sounds like a mouthful, but this is really part of trying to get you to become that next level master audio engineer, to really think about what I've said in this video, consider it, Consider it and investigate it and think about those situations as separate situations that have to be thought of in the way that I'm trying to tell you so that you can do a good job with your equalization. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about the equal loudness contour. So I will see you there.